The Vatican was not built for tremors. Its stones had weathered the rise and fall of empires, the whispers of kings, the heresies of centuries. But that morning, beneath the solemn weight of the dome, there was a tremor. Not of earth, nor wind, nor war, but of truth, finally refusing to bow to power. The headlines were brutal in their clarity: Pope Leo XIV dismisses Cardinal Tagle. Across Rome, bells tolled with no feast to mark. Across the world, the faithful stared at their screens. Questions in their hearts, fear in their eyes. For Cardinal Tagle had not been a man of quiet shadows. He had been a voice. A force. A figure both beloved and feared, depending on which altar one knelt before. And Pope Leo XIV? To many, a paradox. Gentle yet unyielding. Merciful yet unafraid to bleed for truth. They had once stood side by side at the altar. Now one would stand, alone. When one man thought he could confront a pope's soul, he thought he would win. But what happened next? Silenced the world. Inside the apostolic palace, marble halls whispered of destiny. A summons had gone out, without ceremony. Without warning. The Swiss guards flanked the great door. Cardinal Tagle ascended the steps. Not in triumph. Not in humility. But with the measured tread of a man who believed he still held the upper hand. And beyond that door, sat a pope who had spent the night in prayer. Not for vengeance. Not for victory. But for the courage to choose the harder road. Before we begin, consider this: why must some be broken, before truth can break through? Subscribe to God's message for souls. And if you will not, ask yourself, even now, what stirs in your heart to resist the truth? Now, let us enter. Pope Leo XIV had not asked for the weight of Peter's keys. He had not lobbied, nor whispered, nor angled. In the smoke-darkened conclave where his name was called, some had scoffed, a son of a persecuted nation, once dragged from his village in chains. A man who had baptized the dying beneath broken rafters, who had read the word by candlelight while soldiers searched for him. Yet here he was, vicar of Christ. Not through ambition, but through a providence that often chooses the unworthy to shame the proud. And in Rome, that shame was beginning to sting. For while Pope Leo XIV opened the Church's arms wider, welcoming the broken, lifting the voiceless, there were those who whispered that the old walls were crumbling too fast. Among them now stood one of his own. Once his brother in Christ. Now his shadow in the court. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle had not always walked this path. There was a time when their laughter had filled these same halls. When together they had buried the forgotten and embraced the wounded. But power is a patient seducer. In the years since Leo's election, Tagle's eyes had wandered to other altars. Media lights found him easily, he sought them. Political hands reached for him, he clasped them. His sermons began to echo with the words of those who feared change more than they feared sin. Rumors wove their quiet net, Tagle courting factions within the Curia, plotting to stall the reforms Pope Leo bled to see through. Once trusted, now watched. Once brother, now challenger. And this day, this unsought, unspeakable day, had been forced by truths no longer deniable. An emergency Vatican Council had been called, its summons discreet, its consequences seismic. But discretion had failed. Word had seeped beyond marble and mosaic. Now the world watched, through 1,000 blinking red lights. Journalists, tipped off by unseen hands, gathered like storm clouds in St. Peter's Square. Global networks shifted their feeds. A broadcast awaited, a church not just in session, but in trial. For this would be no quiet correction. No private rebuke. This would be the first public dismissal of a cardinal in modern times. A moment poised not only to reshape a man's destiny, but to reveal whether the soul of the Church would remain captive, or stand redeemed. And now, the door was about to open. If you believe truth still matters, even when it wounds, subscribe to God's message for souls. If you will not, write below, what fear still binds your heart from hearing it. The heavy oak doors parted with a slow groan, the sound echoing through chambers where saints and sinners alike had once stood in trembling reverence. Cardinal Tagle entered first, his scarlet robes sweeping the floor with theatrical grace. Behind him trailed 3 aides, silent, calculating, eyes fixed on no one. Before them stood the council, 30 cardinals seated in a wide arc, faces unreadable beneath their zucchettos. Above them all, in the center, rose the papal dais. And seated upon it, Pope Leo XIV. No fanfare announced him. No gilded processional. Only a simple white cassock, worn hands resting upon the arms of an unadorned chair. Eyes steady. Lined with the weight of prayer. A single camera light blinked red, broadcast live to a watching world. Every word would be heard. Every glance, measured. Cardinal Tagle advanced, his voice smooth as silk yet cold as marble. Holy Father, he began, with a bow that bent no deeper than his pride allowed, these halls have seen much change beneath your shepherding. He paused, lips curling in a practiced smile. But, are we not witnessing confusion, rather than clarity? Among the faithful, are they not now asking, what is truth, and who shall speak it? The words hung in the air, sweetened with false respect, sharpened with concealed accusation. Beneath the papal dais, some heads turned. A rustle of robes whispered through the council. Yet Pope Leo did not shift. Did not blink. Did not yield the stillness that now seemed to consume the room. His voice rose, soft as a psalm, firm as stone. Confusion arises when hearts are closed, not when truth is spoken. A pause, pregnant with quiet authority. For the early church stood amid greater storms, schisms, heresies, empires bent on its ruin. Yet it stood, not by silencing truth, but by living it. He allowed the words to settle, no haste, no retreat. The camera's red eye seemed to burn brighter. Around the world, viewers leaned closer, not for spectacle, but for the pulse beneath the words. Cardinal Tagle's brow tensed, barely, but enough. Another volley prepared upon his tongue. The Pope waited. Not as prey before a predator, but as a shepherd before a straying lamb. And the room grew colder still. If you sense where this path now leads, subscribe to God's message for souls. If you will not, confess below, what truth do you fear will find you here? The chamber remained still, save for the subtle tremor now threading beneath Cardinal Tagle's polished tone. The initial mask of deference had begun to crack. His eyes sharpened, his voice, once honeyed, now carried the chill of steel. But Holy Father, he pressed, the words shaped with deliberate force, in aligning the Church with such radical voices, with those who seek to reshape her very foundations, are you not betraying our sacred duty? Are we to be shepherds of truth, or servants of fashion? A murmur coursed through the arc of crimson-robed counselors. Some leaned forward, others shifted uncomfortably. The camera captured it all. Broadcasting to a world hungry for division, ready to feast on the sight of a pope pressed to the edge. Yet Pope Leo XIV did not flinch. Instead, he rose, not in defiance, but in the gentle dignity of a man who had knelt beside too many graves. His voice, when it came, was lower now. More intimate. Carrying the weight of years unsought yet endured. I have served in cities torn by war, he began, eyes lifting, not to the council, but to the watching millions beyond the lens. I have knelt in ruins where no incense burned, where blood marked the stones more than oil. A breath. A memory. I have cradled children dying beneath broken skies. Children whose first words were cries, and whose last were questions. The council sat frozen. Cardinal Tagle's lips pressed thin, but he did not interrupt. He could not. Pope Leo's gaze fell upon him now, not with scorn, but with the aching clarity of a father who had seen too much. One such child, the Pope continued, voice catching with reverent sorrow, looked to me and asked, will God still love me, even if the Church is afraid to? The words rang out, simple, searing. No rhetoric could blunt their edge. Pope Leo stepped forward, unchallenged now by word or will. Politics divides. The gospel unites. A pause, as though he mourned the necessity of the truth he now spoke. When we fear losing tradition more than losing souls, we do not serve the Church. We serve our pride. Across the chamber, silence settled like a funeral shroud. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Only the relentless gaze of the camera, beaming the moment into hearts both faithful and faltering. Cardinal Tagle's knuckles whitened upon the rail before him. But his voice did not yet rise. For the weight of what had been spoken, had not yet passed. Cardinal Tagle's composure was thinning, thread by thread. The soft rebuke had landed deeper than he cared to admit, the image of that burned child searing through the veneer of his well-crafted rhetoric. Yet pride is a subtle tyrant. It does not release its hold easily. With a sharp breath drawn through clenched teeth, he straightened. His voice, once honeyed, now struck the room with cold iron. So, you are a puppet for the world's agenda, he spat, his words no longer veiled, not Christ's teaching. The air fractured. A ripple of gasps swept through the chamber, through the camera feeds that carried this confrontation to millions beyond those ancient walls. Even among the council, eyes widened, some in shock, some in silent approval. But Pope Leo XIV remained still. His gaze did not flinch. His body did not rise. Only his hands moved, slowly, deliberately, folding together atop his lap. And it was then that the watching world saw them. Hands not soft with the privilege of power, but worn. Deep lines etched from years spent lifting the broken, anointing the dying, burying the forgotten. And they trembled, not with fear, but beneath the unbearable weight of unseen suffering. When the Pope spoke, the words came not as a counterattack, but as the solemn voice of truth itself. I have held the dying, the forgotten, he said, eyes never leaving the man who had once been his friend, while others debated doctrine in marble halls. The words floated through the vast chamber. Clear, unhurried. They carried no venom, no bitterness, only sorrow, and conviction. And then, leaning forward, the faintest fire beneath his calm, he continued, you call it naive, to protect the innocent? A pause so long it forced every ear to lean in, every breath held hostage. I call it sacred. And with those 4 words, the ground seemed to shift. In the press gallery, an audible gasp escaped unguarded lips. A camera feed jolted slightly, its operator too human to remain unmoved. Across the world, in living rooms and quiet chapels, tears welled in unseen eyes. And before the dais, Cardinal Tagle stood frozen, his next words caught in the throat of a man who had, in a single moment, lost the moral ground beneath him. Truth had not shouted. It had not struck. It had simply, stood unshaken. If your soul still hears that truth, subscribe to God's message for souls. If you cannot, then write below, what truth today made your pride tremble? The chamber hung in a breathless stillness. The weight of the Pope's words lingered in the air like the slow toll of a distant bell, reverberating through stone, through skin, through spirit. Across the council, some cardinals shifted uneasily, fingers tracing unseen crosses. Others sat motionless, eyes fixed, minds racing. But Cardinal Tagle, he stood rooted, though not in strength. His face betrayed a flicker of something rare, uncertainty. And in that fragile moment, between the tremor of pride and the silence of conviction, Pope Leo XIV spoke again. Not louder. Not harsher. But with a clarity that carved through the noise of pretense. You confuse engagement with endorsement. The words landed like stone upon glass. In reaching out to the lost, we do not surrender truth. In embracing the wounded, we do not abandon holiness. He let the sentence breathe, each syllable carrying the weight of 1,000 unseen acts of mercy. "But tell me," he continued, leaning forward now, eyes narrowing with a gaze both sorrowful and piercing, "why does defending children, comforting the outcast, lifting the unseen, why does this make you uncomfortable?" The question struck not just Tagle, but the entire room. A murmur rippled through the chamber, like wind through dry leaves. Some cardinals exchanged quick, nervous glances. A single cough broke the silence in the press gallery, then nothing. The cameras captured it all, beamed into homes, churches, cathedrals across the globe. Millions now witnessed a man of robes and rank, rendered speechless. And beneath the surface, deeper currents stirred. For Pope Leo XIV's words had done more than confront a single man's pride. They had peeled back the careful veneer of a public life. Those who watched closely saw it, the alliances Cardinal Tagle had courted, political elites whose wealth dictated piety. The closed-door meetings where doctrine was shaped not by conscience, but by convenience. The whispers of promises traded for favor, for position, for control. And here, before the eyes of heaven and earth, that carefully spun web began to unravel. Without a shout. Without a curse. Only with the quiet, relentless force of truth. Cardinal Tagle's hands gripped the edges of his sleeves, knuckles whitening beneath the crimson silk. But no answer came. For when a heart is shown its own reflection, it often finds no words to veil what is revealed. The tremor in the chamber had settled into a silence deeper than any shout could have wrought. Cardinal Tagle, once poised and certain, now stood adrift. Adrift in the gaze of a world that had seen beyond the crimson robes and careful words. But Pope Leo XIV did not press the moment further. Victory was never his aim. With the slow grace of one burdened by both truth and love, he rose. Not to tower, but to invite. His eyes swept gently across the council, then lifted to meet the unblinking lens of the global broadcast. There he paused. And in that pause, the world seemed to lean forward as one. When the Pope spoke, his voice had shed the weight of conflict. It now bore the softness of a father addressing his scattered children. "This is not about one man," he said, each word deliberate, "nor about one office." He breathed, an unhurried moment of reverence. "It is about what kind of church, what kind of world, we dare to build." Across distant screens, across chapels and homes, hearts stirred. "For too long," he continued, "we have shouted past one another. Fear cloaked as zeal, pride masquerading as piety." He looked down, as if searching the stones beneath his feet for the memory of every tear shed in that sacred place. And yet, the gospel was never a weapon. It was, and remains, an embrace. The Pope's gaze rose once more, eyes now shimmering with unshed tears not of defeat, but of longing. "We do not need louder voices," he whispered, "we need quieter souls, who dare to listen, and love." A final silence enveloped the room, heavy, holy. No applause. No declaration. Only the breath of conviction moving unseen through marble and bone. And somewhere in that stillness, though few could see it, Cardinal Tagle's eyes lowered. Not in triumph given, but in a pride, at last, undone. The chamber remained still. There would be no triumphant procession, no thunder of decree. For some truths, need only to be spoken, then left to echo in the silence they command. Pope Leo XIV lowered his gaze once more, the faintest shadow of sorrow touching his features, not for himself, nor for his office, but for a church still learning to choose between comfort and courage. And now, his eyes lifted to the watching world. To every soul beyond those ancient walls. "To you. What would you have said," his voice asked, low, measured, unshakably gentle, "if you were in that sacred room?" A pause, long enough for the question to settle not in mind, but in heart. He held that silence, allowing the weight of it to do its work. Then, his final words, spoken not as Pope, but as a shepherd of the soul, "Comment below, with humility, and with grace. And as the light in the great hall dimmed, as the camera's red eye flickered one last time, his parting blessing carried through the stillness, soft as a prayer, sure as the dawn, may we all seek truth, with humble hearts. And may your soul not leave this story, unchanged. If you walk this path with us. Subscribe today to God's message for souls. But if you still will not, then write below, what truth today stirred you, or scared you, the most.